Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion for Education Month 2021 under the theme Education Reimagined, Exploring New Frontiers for Teaching, Learning, and National Development in the 21st Century. On behalf of the Ministry of Education, Technological, and Vocational Training, I wish to welcome you to this session this evening. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us in this online forum for what promises to be a very interesting and enlightening discussion. I am your host, Dr. Denise J. Charles, and this evening we have lined up an extremely interesting panel, a very diverse panel, and they're going to be engaging in some very rich discussion. And we will be taking questions from you at 7 p.m., from 7 p.m. and onward, and we will let you know when you can begin putting your questions into the YouTube chat. Thank you for all of those. Thanks to all of you who are joining us via MRD's YouTube channel. Our theme for Education Month, as I said just now, is Education Reimagined, Exploring New Frontiers for Teaching, Learning, and National Development in the 21st Century. When we hear the term Education Reimagined, it suggests that there was or is an original imagination, an original blueprint or construct of education from which our 21st century system now finds it necessary to pivot. It in no way negates the value of what our system did for us in the past, but it is a tacit acknowledgement of our need for new approaches to match a new age. While the term education reimagined should not suggest that we have found our figurative pot of gold at the end of the educational rainbow, or that we have reached a utopia where we have effectively answered all of the questions posed with regards to educational development. What it does suggest is a willingness to take fresh guard, to reflect on and review our current educational product with the aim of reconfiguring a system which is best poised to meet the ever-evolving global demands of a postmodern 21st century. In this regard, our theme this evening suggests that the reimagination of education must begin with an exploration of all the frontiers which can impact educational delivery in the 21st century as we move towards strengthening the links between our educational product and our national development. Welcome again. I'm going to introduce to you our panel at this time. And after I've introduced each of them, I'm going to invite them to give some brief opening comments, which will show their reflection on the topic. Dr. Ramona Archer-Bradshaw holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Education with high commendation from the University of the West Indies, a postgraduate diploma in Public Sector Management with distinction, and postgraduate diploma in Education with double distinction from the Henderson Teachers Training College. She has over 20 years of teaching experience and is passionate about education. To this end, she has publications in a number of elite international educational journals in the areas of teacher quality and scientific inquiry, scientific literacy. Furthermore, she continues to conduct research, publish, and present internationally, regionally, and locally. A former principal acting at the Henderson Teachers Training College, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw is now the Chief Education Officer at the Ministry of Education, Technological, and Vocational Training. We have as well on our panel, Dr. David Brown. Dr. Brown is a former trained graduate teacher of history at the secondary level, having taught at the Lodge and Commonwealth schools. He is currently principal of Queen's College and has held that post since 2008. He holds a doctorate in political history, and among a list of publications, his most recent is Race, Class, Politics, and the Struggle for Empowerment in Barbados, 1914 to 1937, which was published by Ian Randall Publishers in 2013. Next up, we have Mr. Mark Hill. Mark is the founder of Reimagined Technologies, Inc. and Biogen Biotechnologies, Inc., two research and development companies in the clean technologies market. He holds a bachelor's honors degree in three-dimension design, industrial design, and is also an MIT-trained product and service innovation specialist, utilizing design thinking methodology. He is currently a research MPhil PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies, specializing in governance and public policy with a focus on design and economics for small island developing states. He is currently the CEO of Barbados Investment and Development Corporation, now trading as Export Barbados. Welcome. Dr. Ian Marshall. Dr. Marshall is an educator with 28 years of experience. He has worked as a teacher trainer and leadership development expert from 2009 to the present. He's currently a lecturer in educational leadership at the University of the West Indies School of Education, Cape Town campus. Dr. Marshall is also an educational consultant who facilitates training for incumbent and prospective principals and teacher trade unions in Barbados and across the region. He works closely with principals to deliver several professional development workshops for teachers at both the primary and the secondary level. Welcome. We have also Mr. Henderson Eastmond. Mr. Eastmond is the executive director of the TVET Council here in Barbados. And we have Mrs. Carol Roberts-Reifer, a broadcaster with over 40 years experience and currently the Chief Executive Officer of the National Cultural Foundation. Welcome to this very interesting and diverse panel this evening, and I am going to give each of you 2 minutes to share your opening remarks on our theme. Let's begin with our Chief.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. Good evening, everyone. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine who is a dentist shared with me an excerpt that she found in one of her old dentistry books. The statement was made by Dr. Ruth Simmons, president of Brown's University on the 31st of March, 2001. And Dr. Simmons said that school ought to be a magical place where you are a queen or a king and where you can focus on your intellect. A place where you can develop who you want to be as a human being. A place where you come to understand what your life can be. That is what school should be for our children. It isn't a place that should focus on standardized tests or focus on the taking of notes. A place that focuses on responses to close-ended questions, or a place where students are forced to sit down and shut up for extended periods during the day. According to the president of Brown's University, she says that school is supposed to be full of hope. It is a place where you go to find out how magical your mind is and how terrific it will be when you develop your mind to its full potential. When I think on what was said in 2001, this is our education reimagined. An education from nursery to tertiary that encourages analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and creativity. One that helps our children to identify real-life problems and to use the knowledge and skills gained through the various disciplines to provide homegrown solutions. One that values technical and vocational subject areas in the same way as what we term academic pursuits. One that develops the whole child physically, emotionally, cognitively, psychologically, and spiritually. One that consistently teaches our children habits of mind. One that tells our children that it is okay to make mistakes from which they can recover and learn from them. That teaches our children to persevere and find humor in things. One that teaches them value. When we look at what the education system is now and compare it to the kind of student that needs to be able to function in the next 2 to 14 years, we are forced to reimagine. This is the reason that the ministry is embarking on education reform. If we are to create the type of system of which I speak, supporting structures need to be in place for our teachers, principals, and parents. We need to audit the skill sets of our teachers and principals and place them where they are more effective. Continuous professional development must be considered at every level, and communities of practice must be formed. Parents need to be given opportunities to play more active roles in their children's learning with the development of parent support groups. Ladies and gentlemen, for our own survival, reimagination within the education system, reimagination in education is not an option. It is indeed a necessity. Thank you, Dr. Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw. I'm going to move to Mr. Hill. Mark?
Good night, everyone. Yes, as we talk about the theme of reimagination of education in the educational space, from where I sit, my primary focus is on the industry and how do we build out exports going forward. As we know, Barbados works in a particular way. And while we're primarily talking about primary through to tertiary education, that education has to flesh itself out in industries and in the commercial space at some point in time. And what we do see is that we have some trends that are taking place in Barbados that are very concerning. We have a case where in 2000, we have just around 248 exporters or companies that engage in export. And now at this point, we have just 105. And based on that 5% decline, we will continue to maybe get down to numbers as low as about 30 exporters by the year 2030. So one of the things that we are really looking at is how do we educate folks to recognize how our economy works and to recognize that there's certain gaps that have to be filled. For example, when it comes to the business of science, how do we apply science and convert science into industrial activities and industrial growth and development? So I'm really here on the panel to really contribute from that particular perspective and to see that how do we close the gaps as we seek to reimagine education at the same time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for those opening comments. Let's go over to Dr. Ian Marshall.
Thank you, Chair, and good night again to everyone. Now, I have a slightly different view to the one expressed by the Chief Education Officer. To my mind, when I think about education reimagined, I think the first thing that we need to do is to do a candid assessment of where we are in terms of our educational system and the extent to which it is fit for purpose. So reform of education is nothing new. From as early as 1990 with the EFA goals, it was suggested that we need to reform education. We have come now, we cycle through, for example, the EFA goals, we cycle through the Sustainable Development Goals, and now we are looking at something called Sustainability 2030. And they have to ask the question, even as we look at the sustainable goals, one of them is inclusive education and quality education. And I ask myself, within 9 years, we have 9 years to reach that target of 2030. And the evidence that has been given thus far suggests that we are way behind the 8 ball in terms of being able to close that gap within 9 years. And my question is this: if we are serious about education reform, then we have to address some what they call structural inequalities in our system, or structural inequities. Because, for example, in Barbados, we are still struggling, for example, with things like giving teachers a voice in education, a real voice, not just what we will call a town hall meeting voice, but I mean a real voice. We're still struggling with things like giving teachers the ability to go through career ladders. We're still struggling with collective bargaining agreements. We're struggling with effectively functioning teacher evaluation systems and also principal evaluation systems. We don't even have, for example, institutionalized mentorship and succession systems within our educational systems right now. So I'm saying that if we are serious about reform, then we have to start thinking reform along different lines. Otherwise, all we will have is education reimagined, and it stays there in our imagination. But in real terms, it will not move the educational product forward. So my position is basically this: if we are interested in educational reimagined, let us adjust those structural inequities in our system first and build a fresh platform on which we can go forward. Because if we don't deal with those structural inequities, what we will have, more of what we will have rather, is schooling without learning. And they end there.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Let's move on to Dr. David Brown. 2 minutes for your opening comments, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
As I look at this topic, you realize that I'm the only person here who is a practical person in the field of education. And how I look at the whole topic is against the back person who is in the midst of education. Let me say that I'm not against educational reform. I am all for changing and improving the system. And therefore, when the opportunity for education reform emerged, I jumped right in. I believe that in the system, who are in it, we need to do more to improve it and deliver quality education. So I want to say here tonight that my bias is one in which, as a practical principle, when I heard about educational reform, I bought into it. I started to engage those at my school who are in educational reform. And I want to say to folks that last year's Teachers Professional Day, we discussed educational reform, looking at staff development and governance. This year we discuss it again. We try to roll out the educational reform plan, and our Teachers Professional Day was discussing the nature of that reform. And my question to my colleagues at Queen's College is, educational reform will come. What will be the nature of this reform? What are we asked to do? Are you prepared in your craft to get into the educational reform? So I must say that the Chief Education Officer and the vision for education and what it should do, I embrace that. I'm hearing Dr. Marshall as well, that there has been a lot of discussion about educational reform. For me, this is an opportunity for us to do more in the educational system. I'm going to get very personal now here in terms of Queen's College. As I said before, we heard about it, we embraced it, we were thinking about it, we introduced innovations. We have married the CVQs.
Dr. Brown, Brown, could you hold that for a bit later? Because I'm going to ask you a very pointed question about that. Okay? So could you hold those specifics for later?
All right. Philosophically, I just heard the gentleman from the BIDC. I want to say that I attended your talk on the 10th of August about the Barbados, and you said that we should be moving towards a biotech island. I'm listening. Educational reform, you said, should be linking the academics with the science and applying science. I have listened to you and embraced that. And for me, the educational reform and reforming the system would take that, take education in that direction for me. That is, I understand all the other challenges that we have, the education and achievement, but from where I stand and as a practical person, this is how I see it and how I intend to pursue it. I will stop here at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brown. And we have Mrs. Carol Roberts-Reifer. Carol?
Thank you very much. And good evening to colleagues and good evening, everyone. I'm listening with rapt attention. And what I'm hearing in just the opening comments is actually, in terms of my notes, a pretty good fleshing out of what education reimagined could look like as a philosophical framework. So when I listened to the Chief Education Officer and her very passionate opening remarks, you begin to see some very clear strategies for reimagining education in Barbados. When I listen to Dr. Marshall, and I agree with him totally, I'm hearing some very clearly articulated recommendations for either shoring up existing pillars or creating new pillars for a new and reimagined structure for the delivery of education. And when I listen to Mr. Hill, I hear a very specific slant towards industry and enterprise. And I'm saying to you and to all listening and watching this evening that underpinning all of this has to be the arts and culture. The arts and culture as a viable and strategic teaching tool that's embedded in the formal curriculum. And we will get into some specifics later, but all of that leading to education as the seat of innovation, because that is what will take us forward. What will that innovation look like? Well, I mean, this is just an opening discussion and we won't be able to get too in depth into it here, but education as the seat of innovation for parents, teachers, and students. Very often when we talk about education and when we've spoken about it in the past and even attempted innovation, it has been pretty one-dimensional. We're either looking at it from the perspective of teachers or the perspective of students. And I'm saying tonight that it is time to look at it as a circle of life. It must be the teachers, the parents, and the students. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Carol. And we have our final opening contribution from Mr. Eastmond. Mr. Eastmond.
Good night, colleagues. I listened with rapt attention to the other presentations, but in terms of where we stand in this country now, we are at the crossroads. And I am coming from the point of view of linking education and training to our economic development, which will come through innovation. Now, education has three great message systems. That is the content. What are you going to teach? And to what levels are you going to teach that in terms of both academic and technical? Your delivery methods, how are you going to deliver? And your assessment methods. Those are the three main message systems in education. Now, in the we have to consider how we're going to do innovation in them. What are we going to do different? How are we going to reorganize the content for its delivery? How are we going to reorganize the system and what methodology we're going to use and where? How are we going to assess? Will it be a one-off test, like in the Caribbean Examinations Council in the Cape, or are we going to do continuous and competency-based assessment as we use in technical education? The whole purpose of education, what are we aiming at when we deal with these people? And when we are talking about schools and probably tertiary institutions, but what about the people who are already in the workforce? We want innovation, and innovation will come through technology. People feel that technology is just computers and machinery. Technology is know-how. How do we organize? Are we going to restructure the Ministry of Education? Is the Ministry of Education structured to do what we want to do? Is the public service structured to do what we want to do? In order to change, we have to reform not only the education and training, we have to retrain those people already in the workforce so that they become more efficient, because that is part of the problem as well. So I know that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we were trying to get secondary education and primary education for everybody. We have it now, but a whole set of those people are just passing through the educational system. And people are now questioning our readability levels of 90% and 99% literacy, right? We're trying to get now in these times, we have to move to the relevance of education. You can't push people through the education system and you only getting 40% employable. You're not making sense. So we have to look at the relevance of what we are teaching, how we are teaching, and how we are assessing it, and looking at our throughput. And the whole thing about technology, how do we work together? Here, Mr. Hill speak. What is the link between what we do in education and what BIDC and Invest Barbados and them are doing? What is the link with what the tourism is doing? I think this is a splendid opportunity that we should learn our lesson now from COVID. where tourism is struggling and will continue to struggle for a considerable time, and the economy will continue to struggle. We have nothing else to lean on. So we are thinking at the TVET Council about workforce development. We are looking at the creative industry, animation and game art and game development. We are talking to the manufacturers about manufacturing technology. We are talking about agriculture. We have not done anything with our land since the sugar cane went dead. We are talking about the fashion industry, and we can begin to talk. If we can get some of these things out, if we can do some import substitution, we will save foreign exchange. And then where we can do exports, we will bring foreign exchange to the country. That is what we need. And it calls for not only a link in the schools, a change in the schools, it calls for a change in the workforce and a retraining and a retooling of the entire Barbadian workforce to achieve what we want to achieve. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eastmond. Now, we know that this topic is very wide and there's so much scope for a lot of discussion, and we're hoping that this panel discussion this evening can be an important vehicle for continued discourse in this area. Well, when we think of education, we're really thinking of an entire system. And I want to direct this first question to the Chief. Research suggests that there is a strong correlation between investment in early childhood development and high levels of social and economic development at the national level. Can you share briefly on a new vision or a fresh focus for early childhood education within the context of our current system? Because if we're looking at national development, we must look at the entire picture. So let's start at the beginning. What new perspective or vision for early childhood education can you share with us?
Thank you for your question, Dr. Charles. And I think for that question, I am going to draw on what Mr. Eastman said. He said that if we want to make inroads when it comes to national development, we have to look at how we teach it. We have to look at what we teach, how we teach, and how we assess it. At the early childhood level, those children go into school full of excitement, full of wonder. I would like to see in that classroom more emphasis placed on getting those children to develop their skills, their attitudes, and less focus being placed on content. I know that very, very early up in the at the level of early childhood, emphasis is placed on getting the students to form letters and to write and so on. While I understand why that was so in the past, I think that moving forward, we have to build the person from that age. By a certain time, 4 or 5 years old, children are formed. So let us spend some time at the early childhood level, getting those children to find out who they are. According to the president from the Brown University that I spoke about, the Brown College, getting them to know who they are, getting them to collaborate with one another, to cooperate, to ask questions, to explore, to investigate, communicate, use language, all of those things that will augur well for when they become adults and are contributing citizens in our society. So that is the change. I would like to see more play-based approaches. Instead of having the children sit down and keep quiet and listen to the teacher, and I know it happens in some classrooms, not all, I would like to see more play-based approaches, children exploring, having fun, and developing a true appreciation for learning. Because beyond the early childhood, beyond the primary and secondary, beyond the tertiary, we want our children to have a love for learning, that they want to pursue lifelong learning. Yeah, so that's my answer to that question, Dr. Charles.
Thank you so much, Dr. Archer-Bradshaw. And I know that those comments are critical because when we think of education and where we're headed, we must start at the beginning, and therefore we must look at the significance and the importance of what we do in those early years in terms of creating that culture of inquiry and creativity in our students. Now, I'm going to pose my next question to Mr. Hill. From the perspective of industry, science, and technology, in which direction would you want to see a reconfigured education system heading? What are those critical national needs in those areas that we need to address in order to move our country's development forward into the 21st century?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Charles. The point that Dr. Brown raised, where we're pitching Barbados as the biotech island and the life science island, we didn't just come to that by some gut feeling. We came to that based on the data that is before us. We have at the University of West Indies about 1,500 students that graduate every year within the life science space. And why? Because from Carol used the term cultural, but from a cultural point of view, many Barbadian families believe that the pathway of really living a happy, healthy life and securing a very good job is you either become a doctor or become a lawyer. So we know that a lot of government's resources is spent in the area of the life sciences. And that's because on one side, a lot of students would most probably graduate with without all these subjects to become a medical doctor. So then they go to biochem, or they just do biology, or they just do chemistry, but they do some sort of scientific thing hoping to find themselves back into the medical profession. So most Barbadian students in the intake at University of West Indies land in that particular space there. So what that data led us to understand is that we have a human resource, underused human resource in the life sciences that we can leverage to build out our industry. So we have, for example, a company like Lens Tech that employs around 200 scientists. The scientists in Barbados is a lot more affordable than the scientists in the USA. In fact, I came from a meeting there today with a particular company that wants to come to Barbados because of our salaries, high education, but the cost of a Barbadian scientist at 8,000 Barbados dollars per month is a lot cheaper than 8,000 US per month for that same scientist. So the biotech space, the life science space, is a space from an industrial development point of view that we are putting our eggs in that basket because of the human resource capacity. Also, we have that legacy in the area of the fermentation technologies, as again, as said, our medical history, very strong healthcare system. So industry is looking at the medical tech, biotech, life sciences, and that is the trend that we're moving in through to 2030, going into 2035. Mm-hmm.
Right, so these are some critical national needs that you have identified. But I want to pitch this question now to Dr. Brown as a principal within our secondary schools. How do you see that link between what Mr. Hill has identified and in our current educational offerings? How can we configure what is offered at our secondary schools so that it bears greater relevance to the needs of industry? Dr. Brown?
Sorry. As I said, I see it as very relevant. As a principal, as soon as these discussions start on educational reform, that was always on my mind. And we had started making links with various entities so that the school can develop and produce what we call the productive citizens of the future. A good example is I heard Carol Roberts talking about the importance of the arts and the performing arts. You know that Queen's College had discussion with the Natural Cultural Foundation to develop a CVQ in entertainment management and such like. We had serious discussions with you. And we have started the theater arts at CSEC. We have started the performing arts. And you would have a marriage of, you see, second K with the CVQs. That is how we have seen part of our innovation. With the TVET Council, we have developed the CVQs. We could discuss that. I see it as extremely important that the schools, I'm sure my colleagues will be thinking about it. We have thought already of the 10 Academy of Excellence, which will develop out of the Ministry of Education. We are going in the area of the technology and mathematics, along with the technical and vocational subjects. We are going to marry them. But we understand the philosophy being pushed about STEAM education. So there's room in there for the arts. In other words, I believe it is about time that education respond to the developmental needs. Education has always been the center of national development, and that we respond, but not that we just produce students like a factory. We understand the importance of educating the total person, the student out there for the world of work, the world of study. We are going to place some emphasis on the teaching of Excel and the various students being able to use data while they're in school, data outside the school, data in the world of work and study. We are going to produce out of the schools, or that should be our mandate, to produce out of the schools a better student who can function in the wider society and work. So I want to say here that yes, we have started that process at Queen's College. I agree with my friend from the BIDC. For a long time, I've asked myself, especially every year when we announce that we have won so many scholarships and exhibitions, I asked myself, who are these people? What are they going to do? In 2015, at my speech there, I raised these questions. There were lots of scholarships and exhibitions winners, and I asked myself, what are these people going to do? What will be their contribution to society? Are they going to make a significant contribution in the area of science and commerce and business? So I've seen that. I want to say that I started on the innovation in the school of having children to enjoy education, to see the education as relevant to them, what they do, relevant to their future and their career, and that I'm at the same time responding to what is going on in the wider society. I want to say here tonight that it is an excellent opportunity now in Barbados to really reform the educational system, to make it relevant, to produce the productive citizens and the citizens focus. The gentleman from the BIDC, he is talking about the revenue streams down. For a long time, we should have paid more attention to educating our people, and rather than putting our emphasis in the tourism basket, that we should have placed education at the center of development. Now, one of the things that I would hope that we would develop from here on is to have no disconnect between the schools and the BIDC, the Ministry of Education, the business community. In fact, I think that the gentleman from the BIDC, I listened to you that day about your biotech, and I reach out to you and tell you I'd like to set up a committee that we can meet on a regular basis. I need to talk to you, you talk to me in the school and tell me what you're looking at. You just tell me what to do and I can get it done in terms of moving education forward and moving this country forward.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I like what you're saying, and particularly because you are the principal of Queen's College, and we know within the context of Barbados, there's a certain, traditional expectation of a school like Queen's College. Yet you've been bold enough and willing to step outside the box, take the bull by the horns, and begin your own reform or your own reimagination of what a school like Queen's College, which many still have within a traditional construct in their own imaginations, you have basically reimagined it for yourself as the educational leader. And therefore, I want to pivot to Dr. Marshall. Now, you work with principals across the region in the area of educational leadership, and I'm sure that change management is a critical part of your discourse on educational leadership. Now, while Dr. Brown has identified himself as one who's been willing to step outside the box, as it were, what leadership challenges do we need to surmount, particularly as we work with principals, so that they can be better poised as instructional leaders and organizational leaders to really bring about new changes in terms of the models of educational delivery that we see in our island?
Thank you,
Because
Chair.
leadership is critical. Leadership, as Dr. Brown has shown, leadership is critical.
Yes, you are correct. Leadership is critical. And I think the number one challenge that we have when it comes to leadership is our concept or the concept that has been established for years as it relates to what is a leader. The most important thing you have to understand as a leader is that it is not about you. It is about building capacity among the members of staff and ensuring that even after you have left the organization, you have produced after your own kind. The challenge that we have in terms of leadership and management overall is that persons, and I don't want to say persons, some principles I will say are petrified about even devolving power to others and developing people. That is just the reality. So when you have persons, for example, in your school, you have teachers who are able to deliver on teacher leadership, but then you don't have that supporting role being played by some principals because they see them as threats. So I'm thinking that if we are talking about the role of the leaders, we have to, first of all, start from the premise that leadership is not about bossing people, it's not about dominating people, it is about being a servant and developing leaders after your own kind. So your role as a leader is not to say, well, I am the big McGuffey in the school. Your role as a leader is to see the extent to which you can build capacity such that when you are not there, the school continues to run and run effectively, and you can see many persons under your tutelage, as it were, being given promotions and going on to lead schools of their own. And in order to do that, you have to create the culture for that. And I'm saying that unless we change our mindsets about what is a leader, because you have to move away from this hero leadership mentality and move towards a more servant leadership mentality so that we are interested in building capacity among our leaders. We don't even have, as you said earlier, a basic mentorship program that is institutionalized. We don't have that. So we are always facing situations where, okay, persons are going off and we have to find people hurriedly to fill these positions. What we should have happening is a structured system of mentorship, first of all, and then also succession planning. Those are the things that, to my mind, are needed in our system so that we build, again, capacity among our teacher leaders. That is what we need to do. And that is the starting point. As I say, that is not the thinking of many of our leaders because they are not trained in that type of way. They are trained that, okay, I am the leader and you must do as I say and follow me. But if you're talking about creating critical thinkers, you have teachers in your midst who would have been critical thinkers. They have brains, they have done masters, some of them have even done PhDs, and you have them sitting in schools and they're not being utilized because some people feel threatened by those very people who our education system has educated, and then they're being asked to sit. So I'm saying we need to change our concept of what is a leader. And once we change that concept, you will get more discretionary effort coming from the teacher leaders, and that augurs well for the educational system.
Now much of what you've said is fairly loaded, because when we think of reforming a system, in truth and in fact, we have to begin by thinking of reforming the way people think, washing their brains more or less, helping us to see things differently, because when we see things differently, then we operate differently. But coming off the heels of what you've said, which I agree with some of what you've said in terms of needing to see that built capacity within schools, etc. We are aware, however, of the fact that our traditional mindsets, our traditional perspectives on what education is and what we see as good education, I think those concepts are still very much ingrained within our system. And even we see those attitudes expressed so much by the general public, you know, when there's this fear of releasing certain things like the common entrance exam, etc., because there's this fear and there's this idea that we still have of, you know, elite schools or elite subjects even. How do we begin to change those mindsets? Because we can't just think of change in terms of policy. Yes, policy will inform the action in the schools, but when people's thinkings have not changed, when their thoughts have not changed, they will do the very same thing that they've done all along. And I want us to begin to think of that. How can we begin to edge people, push people towards a different philosophy of learning and of education? You know, I'm one to always say, I'm tired of hearing people say, this child is good with their hands, as if when you're good with your hands, you're not also good with your brain, you know. But students who go in another academic strain, they're good with their brains, while these others are good with their hands. Well, we are pushing and promoting technical and vocational education and the need for world skills. We don't want to see that divide in the styles and the types of learning and in the different content areas. So I'm going to pose this question to Mr. Eastmond, and perhaps some others can weigh in on it as well. Perhaps the chief may want to weigh in after, but I'm going to pose this question to Mr. Eastmond. How can we begin to carve greater links between what is done at the Ministry of Education and what something like the TVET Council, your organization, what you do, so that we can really see a greater marriage across the system with respect to the types of skills we want to see our students emerging, where there's not that separation. Yes, you are promoting technical and vocational education, but we don't want this idea that it is inferior to what people call academic learning, which I think is a serious problem, because no matter what you're studying, you need to use your brain. And there really should be not that separation in terms of the types of areas that students pursue for study.
We at the TVET Council, we are now placing the emphasis on the technical part, because I think over the years, the emphasis was on just the vocational part. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. We have to share, be able to share information. When we show people, when we are able to share information on the jobs, in more sophisticated countries, they can tell you how much a carpenter or a technician will make in a year. When you go on the websites for colleges and technical colleges overseas, they'll tell you that a carpenter or technician or electrician can make so much a year. And you know, we know for a fact that some of these people put us in the shade. A lot of them put us in the shade in earnings when the year comes, but that is not recorded anywhere, that is not shared. So we at the TVET Council, we are setting up a monitoring system for TVET. And we hope to get to the point that we can be able to share this information along with the Ministry of Labor on different types of jobs, because there's a lot of ignorance out there, but I think it is slowly changing. With respect to what people do, people think that when you do go into a technical field, that your bare hands, when you get past a certain level, you gotta know the algebra though. The people who are beauticians gotta know the chemistry and the biology. If not, the chemicals that they put in your hair will drop out your hair and peel off the skin off your face. When it gets to a certain level, there's a complete marriage between academic education. You gotta know the science. When you go in the construction and architectural field, you gotta know the mathematics and the physics. So as you go higher up, you have to complete that marriage. We have not been going higher up, and that is what we are fighting. We are fighting at the level 3s and level 4s in the CVQ, and we are fighting at the new skills. We had a future skills grant. It was in October, I think, September, October. 3D digital grammar, aerial robotics, building information modeling. This building information modeling, you don't need to draw on the plan of the house. It constructed via the computer. You could see the inside of the house, like a model. Mobile apps development and the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is really a network of the physical objects, the sensors and the software and the other technologies. And that was 100 students, 20 in each of those 5 areas. But you know where most of the children come from? Most of the children come from Queen's College and St. Marcus and Harrison College. And let me tell you, 80% of them were boys. So that tells you something about where the interest is, because we say the boys are not interested. And the children are already on the internet, and they know a lot more than the parents, but the parents are still traditional, and they force the students down a particular path because of the ignorance of the parents. So we have to, I am saying that we have to re-educate our workforce, re-educate our parents, share information on careers and career paths. And right now we at the TVET Council, we have an agreement with Henderson to because we had such a demand for this that in the first 2 days it was full. We got to create one. It was for 16 to 18 or 16 to 19. We have to get one built now for the younger students because people are lining up for next year. But we want them to go on. So we are developing standards in robotics in conjunction with Henderson for Henderson to deliver in their evening program. We are developing associate degree and technical degree to be delivered by the local training institutions in animation and art. We are developing one in game development and game design as the first three. We were discussing one in practical agriculture, but we're in discussions with the ministry because of the Hope project and the Jukes project and the Chinese grant, if we need to do that. We are talking to the manufacturers about, we're developing the associate degree for the manufacturers, the manufacturing technology. They need that for the MA. We will move on to fashion because fashion, right, is $1 billion industry that we don't take part in here in Barbados. So we are looking, we see these things as low hanging fruit that can help the economy. But people need to see the careers and they need to see the money. That is why I say in Barbados, when we talk about technology, technology is know-how. It's not only machines and computers. We have to learn how we are going to work together because a lot of the ministries work in silos. We got to know what Invest Barbados and Export Barbados, the needs coming from there, will inform the training, and we train to suit.
Thank you.
We need those people to put us in contact with the overseas players. What do we know about the overseas markets? We need that information, know-how. Let me stop there.
Thank you. I like what you said in terms of needing to let the public know, needing to let the parents know what the options are. And this is going to move me right on to addressing Carol Roberts-Reifer with this specific question. One of the most significant changes in the 21st century has been the growth in the creative and the cultural industries and the resulting boom in creative capital in developed countries. How can countries like Barbados, as small island development states, go about harnessing our creative capital? And what role should our educational system play in this? And I wanted to put this question directly after what Mr. Eastmond just said, because I know a lot of parents are iffy about their children getting involved in the arts. And I think the National Cultural Foundation has done an excellent job in terms of leveraging the arts and showing how important the arts are from a national scale. So what role should education really play in developing our country's creative capital?
And I'm hesitating because I think I'm going to answer that, Denise, in a roundabout fashion.
No problem.
Say that we can't have any discussion, any meaningful discussion, or any meaningful strategies to reimagine education, which is the term we're using this evening, without tearing down some of the very entrenched systems and value judgments that currently exist in our education system. And it's not about whether they are right or wrong or good or bad. I just think that they have served their time and the time has long come. It's been a long time coming that they be changed. And so I asked this question: what does the Barbadian student in the 21st century look like? How is that student equipped to function in the very competitive global space? Is that student, and I mean, when I say student, I mean primary all the way up, is that student comfortable in their Bajan skin and psyche? How does that student exemplify the best of the Barbadian personality? How can we shatter the notion of bright and dancy and try to find the spark in every child and light it? I've heard references to the annual scholarships, and I've heard references to students in science and all the rest, and all of that is very, very good. But if we do not change the structure that has been ingrained in us, and I am 50 enough years old, and it was around before me, that says I can excel at any subject, and the system allows me to excel in any subject, woodwork or chemistry, dance or principles of business, sports or English literature, that I can excel in any subject to the highest strata in the education system without being judged as bright or dancy or good at sports, but not. And I say this not just as the CEO of the NCF, but as the mother of a child who endured that in this education system, who was told that he was good at a sport, which is cricket, but his report reflected that he was failing by the current existing and entrenched standards of the system. My second response to your question is the tools that we are using for teaching. I love Shakespeare, I love classical music, but I also love what is homegrown and mine. And I think that we need to hold it again in terms of value judgments by the same estimation. So we have to very systematically retell our history, share our stories, and inspire our students by using the texts, the films, the music, the choreographies, the recipes, if it's food and nutrition, the forays into science and technology. And let me end by saying this: it is all here already. It may not all be to the quote unquote global standard, but it is here. And if we do not do an audit as part of the reimagination of education to know what is here, so that I know what TVET is doing and TVET know what I am doing, and it is systematic and strategic and entrenched and part of the structure, one of the pillars of the education system. Every year at this time, we can have this discussion, and we would have got either nowhere or just a few steps forward. It requires a total tearing down, and I don't mean that in a negative way, to build back up, so that every student feels that they can be first and foremost a productive Barbadian, regardless of area of endeavor, and that the education system allows them to walk that path to as high of a standard that they want to go.
Carol, you must have been peeping at my notes, because I actually had that question for you a bit later, where I was going to talk about the ideal Barbadian citizen, because I think when we think of our educational development, when we think of its relationship to our national development and by extension, our economic development, we tend to think of the figures, we tend to think of the money, and these things are all important. The capital is important, but the citizen, the person, is the one that we also need to pay a special attention to. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because I was going to ask you about that ideal Barbadian citizen. And I think that very much culture and our cultural heritage and teaching on our culture and our heritage is critical to emerging the right type of Barbadian citizen of the 21st century who's going to have a place on the global stage. And I want to pivot to our Chief Education Officer now, and she would have heard the comments on the links between, with respect to the need for more technology education or to have those links with industry, etc. And yet within our schools, we know that there is still that compartmentalization of subjects. Yes, we're going to operate in departments, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how can we perhaps move our teachers and our instructional leaders closer to understanding the role that integration should play in terms of integration across the curriculum, so that students get to see the connections between subjects and among subjects, and then that they're able to make the relevant applications to life, that they understand that when they're studying a particular area, there is some relevance to my life in terms of something that I may hope to do in the future, or there is some skill that I can learn, even if it is not necessarily my career. As I always tell people, it was my study of literature that led me to want to help other people, because in studying literature, you're studying the human mind, you're studying human behavior. So how can we help students to understand those links? And how can we help teachers to help their students to see that vision for a more integrated curriculum?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Charles. The only way that that can be done is if we teach our children for life. Very often, we focus on teaching the subject and teaching to the exam. If we have in the forefront of our minds that we are educating these children so that they're able to navigate effectively within their everyday lives, I am certain that many of our teachers will approach teaching differently. Now, Denise, I'm going to tell you, when I did my PhD, I did it in scientific literacy. And there was a quote by it was Rannick May, and he spoke about education through science or science through education. It sounds the same, but it's quite different. Education through science. It means that the end game is to ensure that at the end of the day, the child or the person, the student, understands the subject, yes, but understands the subject so that he or she can utilize it in their everyday life. So it goes beyond learning theories and concepts, but applying those theories and concepts to things that you do every day. Brushing your teeth. Why are certain chemicals in toothpaste? As opposed to teaching the thing in an abstract way. So I think more and more as teachers in the education system need to look at it in a way that they are contributing to the development of citizens who need to understand how these concepts and these facts and these principles are related to everyday life. Once that is done, you cannot teach the subject in a pure way, because everyday life is not pure, it's a mixture of disciplines. So if in a physics class, a teacher is teaching, I don't know, methods or modes of heat transfer, and they're looking at conduction, convection, and radiation, they're not just going to give notes on conduction, convection, and radiation. It is hoped that they can use those concepts and teach something like land and sea breezes, how that relates to the physics, how that relates to the science. So more and more our teachers need to think in that kind of way, help the students to make the connections so that the children can understand the relevance of what they're learning. Sometimes our children are not interested in the classroom or interested in what is happening in the classroom because it's downright boring. It is not capturing their attention. It is not relevant. So they need to see that relevance in the classroom every single day so that they're excited about what is being taught, so that they can see how they can use it to their benefit and to help them as they move forward in their lives.
Thank you, Chief. Now, I want to say at this time that we acknowledge our audience who are viewing via YouTube, and we want to open to questions from you. I have a number of comments from our audience. They're not really questions, but I will just mention some of what they've said because I think some of them are making some very poignant statements. One contributor says, doing the same things the same way and expecting different results is really crazy. And I can understand that. You know, we can't do things the same way and expect to get different results. So if we want change, we do have to embark on changing what we're currently doing. Someone else says we need to promote the concept of multiple intelligence and that everyone has at least one talent which should be used to the greatest good. And we know that there's a lot about multiple intelligence theory in terms of how we teach our students and what we expose them to and how we develop their individual skills. And someone else says that the marriage of academic and skills, well, I guess they mean technical and vocational skills, should be done from as early as possible. I know we tend to focus a lot on technological and vocational education as we move into the secondary realm of learning. And at our primary levels, we give our students more of a general type of education. Yes, there has been a heavy focus on the core skills like literacy and numeracy with mathematics and English, etc. Do you imagine a system, Chief, where at the primary level, we can perhaps begin to introduce our students, even though they are still young, perhaps at the upper primary level, we can begin to introduce them to more diverse offerings so that as they move off into the secondary schools, you know, they're already, you know, inquisitive about new pathways for learning and new areas. Do you see this as something that we could possibly do in the future?
Denise, of course. And I'm smiling because if I could expose our primary school students to everything as early as possible, I think that they would be better off. But I know it's not possible to expose them to everything. But I always say, even the most difficult concept, with the right teacher, that concept can be explained to a child at the nursery level. Yes? So I think that the more exposure we give to our children at a very, very early age, the better they will be at understanding who they are. For example, I heard Carol speak about the fact, speak about her son, playing cricket and so on, and talking about the academics. And so there are children who go to school from nursery reception all the way through. And all these children know is that they're coming last in class all the time. When it comes to the academic, they're not performing well. What does that do to the morale of a child who every year from reception all the way to class 4, coming last, or the teacher is not paying him or her the attention, they're not getting the accolades? What does that do to the morale of that child? If that child is exposed to music from a very, very early age in a fun way, if that child is exposed to physical education in a fun and exciting way, and they realize, you know what, I'm good at this. I may not be so good at the other thing, but I'm really, really good at this. If they're exposed to gardening, agriculture, and they're really good at that, then at least it gives them an opportunity to build their self-esteem. We need to give our students as many opportunities as possible, as early as possible, so that they can find out who they are and become better individuals. Now, I don't want to go on too long, Denise, but the brain is going, so I have to speak here. From 1997, the heads of CARICOM, they met and they came up with the ideal Caribbean citizen. And I heard Carol speak about what does it mean to be a Barbadian. But when you read those characteristics of the ideal Caribbean citizen, you can almost align it to what a Barbadian should be. It speaks about development of multiple literacies, independent and critical thinking, questioning the beliefs and practices of the past, and bringing it to bear with the problem as it relates to the problem solving of the future. It speaks about being imbued with values, all of these kinds of things. If our children are exposed to certain things early and they recognize who they are early, we will not have a lot of the problems that we are having today when they hit 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. And that is the way you feel about it, Dr. Charles.
Thank you so much. And I hope that we can have further discussions as to what that should continue to look like in terms of our actual educational system from nursery right through to tertiary. I'm going to direct this next question to Mark. It is said that we are living in a creativity and innovation-driven economy. And these are actually core demands for sustainable development in the 21st century. In your opinion, therefore, if we are living in a creativity and innovation-driven economy, what do we need to do? How do we need to restructure what is happening at the level of our educational system so that we can meet those global demands?
Okay, thanks, Dr. Charles. One of the things I really want to underscore on that point on innovation, especially after 6 months on the job and looking back. When I first was asked to be CEO, I had my ideas, had my bright concepts about innovation and design. But when I got in and actually saw what the need was, and I'm not overemphasizing this in any way, I'm just telling you what the data is showing and the crisis that we actually have in the industry. I actually had to pivot and realize that really and truly, innovation is really about getting your science right, particularly for Barbados, right? And I'm going to just stick on this and keep saying it over and over. Let me give you some examples. A lady invents or develops a fantastic golden apple juice, one of the best tasting in the world, but for her to get that product into the European market or even into the Miami, it has to be scientifically analyzed for every single component. It has to meet standards and it has to have quality infrastructure built into it. So there's no way to escape the science. Somehow we seem to think that we can bypass science and build out industry. Industry is science, science is industry. And that is the thing that I'm a person who's studying design and study innovation, train with MIT and everything, in the win it. Is it real? Can it win? Is it worth it? I mean, I'm a trained industrial designer. So when it comes to innovation, my bias should be towards being design centric. But Barbados in particular does not have that as its core. When we look at the data again in terms of what is going out of the island, 75% of our top 5 exporters in this country are involved in biotrade, biological business. Those 75% of our, at the tier 2 level, we have another 6 exporters. Again, 80% of them are involved in biotrade. At tier 3, another 70% involved in biotrade. So 20% involved in design activities, and then a 10% participating in ocean activities at that stage. So what the data is showing us is that Barbados needs to get its science right if we are going to create or the wealth and build out the track. The relationship between education and the economy has to be tied, because school is not the only place that educates. So when we talk about educating values and all that stuff, it's fine, but you get values in home as well. You get these things in church, you get these things in society. So the school environment, but the school, because of the investment by government, has a direct economic value creation role to play, right? Because of the investment, we're spending over 500 million. That has to turn over, and that has to translate into at least $1 billion US in foreign exchange. So we just can't speak about education, charter formation and stuff like that when we're spending $500 million. It has to be tied also to the reality of foreign exchange. And to generate the foreign exchange that we need, we got to get our science right. It doesn't matter what you're producing. You can't get it into those markets without the science. You cannot. So what is innovation for us? Getting our science right. Yeah, so
Thanks,
that's it
Mark.
for me. Yeah,
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark, for that intervention. All right, I'm going to go back to Carol. And before I do, I just want our viewers on YouTube to know that you can ask questions. I know I am seeing a lot of comments, but we do want some questions for our panelists. So if you do have some questions, please feel free to post your questions for our panelists. Now, Carol, let's go back to looking a bit at the creative arts and the cultural industry. We heard earlier of when Henderson spoke, he spoke of the need to share the data, let parents know, let the society know that, you know, when you're engaged in certain fields of endeavor, you know, you can make money, you can support your family. And as he rightfully said, there are so many artisans and individuals in technical skills-based fields who are making a lot more than perhaps traditional academics are. Not perhaps, and we know that for a fact. How can we see the treatment of the arts in our educational system, where we can help both parents, teachers, and even our students to see these as viable income earners? We know that within the context of COVID, many of our artists, you know, they have suffered because there was a fallout in the entertainment industry. But be that as it may, we've seen creative ways where they can still perhaps make some money through digital projects, etc., and virtual events. And we are residing in a digital economy. How do we see the arts being shaped within the context of the digital economy, one, and how can we help our constituents in education, our stakeholders, our parents, our teachers, our students to see the viability in the arts?
I think that we have to, on some occasions, talk less and listen more. Listen more to our students, listen more to parents, and listen more to teachers. Because the administrators, the education administrators, and I'm not saying this in an offensive way, don't know it all. There is, thanks to the digital age, there's too much happening too quickly, changing too rapidly by too many people in too many diverse spaces for any one entity to know everything that is happening in their own sector. So, and to give you an example, when I'm looking right at the screen and seeing Mr. Eastmond, my good friend. So I'm gonna pick him, and he was talking about animation and the fashion industry and all the rest. Yes, we do not have a thriving competitive fashion industry, but there are people doing things in fashion. Do you know that there are Barbadians making some pretty stylish bags and making some great skincare products? Do you know that in animation, there are youngsters who have not gone to university and who probably were not the quote unquote bright children at school, who are making not just a decent living, but a very good living? To bridge the gap between these people continuing to excel in relative obscurity and being shown as shining examples as to what can happen not only in the creative industries, but in Barbadian enterprise, then you need Mr. Hill. And so we can no longer continue to operate in silos. There must be synergies. That little child that is going to nursery school or primary school at 7 years old, who is looking out through the window, totally distracted because they can no longer learn. They are a child of the digital age, and they do not learn, and they can't learn in the way we are continually teaching them. But they can take your phone and create a meme that is hilarious, or they can take your phone and when they give it back to you, you don't know the first thing as to how to get it working again. That child is our Hills and Export Barbados's future client. They cannot get from where they are to Mr. Hill or to anything in tourism or anything in entertainment or anything in law or anywhere unless we work together and bridge that gap. And the other thing I will say, Denise, is that even when we speak, and when I listen to people speak, and they think they're speaking positively about the inclusion of the arts and culture in education, you can hear in their voice, and you can hear from what they are saying, that they don't see it as totally immersed in education. It is always extracurricular. And I say to all of you this evening, Denise, you know it well, because we've actually started some collaborations between the NCF and the Ministry of Education. Our culture underpins every aspect of our education delivery, every single aspect. The innovative entrepreneur that Mark Hill is looking for can and should be using his or her culture and heritage and transforming it into something that can stand proudly on a global stage, make money for them, and make money in turn for the country. It has to immerse every aspect of the delivery of education. But I will end as I began. We also have sometimes to take a step back and listen to the children and listen to the teachers, because there are some extremely innovative teachers and doing a lot with very little, but we don't listen to them. They're not part, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but I don't get the impression that they are collectively part of charting the current and the proposed new path for education, and they need to be.
Excellent contribution, Carol. Thank you so much. Now I want to take some questions from our viewers on YouTube, and I'm going to direct this question to the Chief. Our educational system is hardwired to teach to the test. We recognize this. Now, what do we do after all the acknowledgements and rhetoric? When and how does the revolution start? Chief, do you want to take that question?
For sure. Thank you, Denise. The revolution starts from today, or even from before today. I'm saying this because we said earlier, even before we can look at changing policy, we have to change mindsets. And from the time I took up this office, I've been spending almost every day engaging with people, engaging with the public, trying to hear from them. I've met with the unions, I've met with principals, I've met with teachers, I've met with everybody, trying to hear from them to find out exactly what they see in this new educational, as it relates to this new educational product that we want to offer. Now, we know, yes, that we've been teaching to the test for a while. This is not something that started yesterday, but given what is happening in this COVID-19 environment, it is something that needs to stop. And that is how I feel about it. That is how the person who asked the question may feel about it. But there are others who believe that we should still have an 11 plus next year. There are others who believe that we should still have standardized tests. So we need to get all of the collective views and make decisions based on that. I had shared in an earlier interview that with regard to the 11 plus and the whether we will have an alternative exam, that information will be shared with the public shortly. But I assure you that I am taking into account all of the views, I'm taking into account all of the suggestions that have been made thus far, because that is how we have to approach education moving forward, Denise. All stakeholders have engaged Henderson Eastmond. He's here, he spoke about the developing the coding and robotics standards for Earthston. We started that back then when I was wearing a different hat. Now that I'm wearing this hat, we engaged again to see how can the ministry leverage what the TVET Council is doing. How can we help our secondary schools when it comes to in the tech areas and forming partnerships between schools and businesses. There are a number of things that we are discussing. We're discussing, we're discussing things like financial literacy and so on, you know, how we are going to introduce that as well, because we recognize that it goes beyond the mathematics, and this education goes beyond the mathematics and the English that we've been teaching and focusing on. And I know, Carol, and I agree with you, there are teachers out there who are working extremely hard. There are teachers who, you correctly said, are doing their best with very little. The teachers also are teaching to the test because at the end of the day, I understand that questions are asked with regard to when their children do not perform. So we have to change this entire mindset. It can't only be at the level of the teachers. It has to be at the level of the principals. It has to be at the level of the parents. It has to be at the level of the ministry. So as I speak, we're collaborating and we're charting paths to move away from what we've done for the past how many ever years with regard to examinations in Barbados and teaching to the test.
Thank you so much, Chief. Actually, in your response, you answered a couple of other questions, because there were a couple questions towards whether or not we were asking when we were going to begin teaching about financial literacy and about the management of money, etc. And you made reference to those in your response. Also, with respect to teaching to the test and the idea that teachers are evaluated in terms of the performance of their students. And this question was asked as a related question: will education reform seek to empower teachers to build critical thinkers versus exam passers? And I think the Chief would have more or less answered that. I think in what you said just now, that it is not just about the exam and passing the exam and teaching to the test, but building an entire citizen and someone who's able to think critically outside the context of the exam and outside the context of school. All right. There's this question here. I don't know if maybe Henderson may want to answer this. Will there be a greater thrust for secondary school students to have internships with businesses where they can learn on the job? To what degree, perhaps this individual is perhaps asking about internships and the role that internships can play in helping to develop student skills. I know there are many schools that have very active job attachment programs. Some schools do a very good job at organizing this for themselves within their own schools among their senior students. So this question is being asked. I don't know who wants to take it. Will there be a greater thrust for secondary school students to have internships with businesses where they can perhaps learn on the job?
Well, the CVQ, I know the level 2 calls for internship. The level 1 may be limited, but schools have already engaged with the business community to have that done. There's an apprenticeship program at the Barbados Vocational Training Board, and a lot of people don't seem to know about it, where you spend 3 days in the work, 2 days in school and at the institution, and 3 days in the workplace, and you're assessed by the workplace. So that is already happening, but we need to deepen it. Sometimes the trouble is to find it to get business houses to be engaged. But I want to go back to some of the 3 message systems I talked about, and we're talking about them, the content. What are we going to teach? Somebody talk about technology education. I believe that technology education should be a part of the core. Nobody talk about the core. Most advanced countries who've been successful, embarked on a curriculum core, a set of things that everybody must do to define the output of schools. And I believe technology and science should be part of that. We talk about assessment. We cannot get away from testing, because even if when you do TVET, you gotta do your performance test. A pilot gotta do his test. If not, he can't be a pilot. We can do world folk testing. It's what we do, how we use it. So I believe we could integrate the TVET and the technology education from primary. Jamaica has done it through the chief education officer. She did that for her thesis at UTEC, Dr. Grace McLean. We have to take some serious policy decisions in Barbados. Sometimes we are afraid to take policy decisions because we think about who we're going to offend. Jamaica has taken the policy decision that they're going to keep their children in school till 18. But they wouldn't all do academic. The people could do a mixture of CVQ and other things and technical subjects and define the output of the type of school that you have. When you talk about content, how you going to organize to deliver the content? Do we want the CVQ at every school in Barbados, or are we going to create technical high schools, right? We talked also about standards. Mr. Hill talked about standards. Barbadians aren't afraid of standards of any kind. People don't want the teacher performance to be implemented. Workplaces don't want performance of standards to be implemented in the workplace. It's a cultural thing in Barbados. People don't like to be assessed. We're talking about assess, not test, assess against performance. And that's the problem with our manufacturers. People want to produce juices, but when you got to export the juice, when you pick up something in the store, you got to be able to read the label. I learned that since I became diabetic 15 years ago. People just read the labels, they want to know in it. We got that, as he said, the science. Singapore takes, they have about a 90 to 95% efficiency in their educational system. They got their academic side, yes, but they take the so-called children that we call dunksy and backward and put them through a technical education at 2 levels with over 90% throughput. Those people repair the planes, they repair the equipment, they're the nurses.
But Mr. Eastmond,
medical technologies.
That's what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to get away from that idea that the technical and vocational students are dunces. We want to reform that thinking.
But
we want to wash our brains of that way of thinking, because that's not the case at all.
What I'm saying, it has been done before.
Yes.
What are we afraid of in this country?
Yeah.
We have to take some serious policy decisions as well about standards.
Dr. Brown, I want you to weigh in on this whole question of experience. Someone did ask about that as well in terms of experience informing learning. And that previous question that I asked Mr. Eastmond with respect to job attachments at your school, what kind of structures have you put in place to ensure that your students, even as they embark on the CVQs, that they get the experience necessary? How is it done at your school?
We have at the time a very limited job experience and job attachment, but we have job attachments, especially in the area of building construction, where our students go and visit sites and are attached. Because we are blending the academics and the technical, the job attachment is not a long one. There is a company,
more like a job shadowing, perhaps.
Right, where the student will go for a day at this, 1 day, perhaps a week at the company and get the job experience. I must say to you though that we recognize it. We have been trying for a very long time. As a school located in the Warrens area, we have been trying to establish links with the business places, quite unsuccessful for the time being, with the business places, to work with them to have job attachments. I want to say though, I try to get away from Queen's College and trying to get rid of the notion that it is purely an academic school. The students take to the technical subjects in a way that you would never believe, but that comes with the mindset that all education is useful. I always say that to them. A good example is, I have a student now who got 9 CXCs. He did K and he did physics and chemistry and math, but he also did CVQs in building construction and metalwork engineering. He is at York University studying for a degree in engineering. That is the sort of student I want to turn up from Queen's College. He has no bias towards any particular subject, but he had to battle, or we had to battle, with the notion of Queen's College as a school that is largely academic, and that is what we are good for. And be able to demonstrate that we can blend, as I said before, blend and marry the technical with the vocational. And I hope Roberts is listening. We went across to you, we reach out. In terms of the arts, we had the discussion with you, we are going to follow it up, but COVID intervened and upset everything. We are going to have the performing arts, and you want to help us with entertainment management and help us to develop a CVQ. And we are going to insert the arts in what we deliver at Queens. They're going to be something for everyone in the.
Denise, may I come in
I
here?
wanted right to. Yes,
Excellent.
Yes. May
Yes,
I come in?
Carol.
Yeah, may I come in here, Denise, and challenge the Chief Education Officer? It may be unfair, but to challenge the Chief Education Officer and all of the principals like Dr. Brown, that we in the arts fraternity want to see very soon, as early as at the end of this new school year, that when the scholarships are announced, they're not just in the sciences, social sciences and the medical sciences, that scholarships are announced for people who are excelling in the arts and culture and sports and the quote unquote vocational studies as well. They too are worthy of excelling and being rewarded for excelling.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you, Carol. I don't know if the chief wants to respond.
I'm smiling because I agree. And Denise, you know how I feel about that too.
That's right. Thank
Yes,
you.
we're working towards it. So thank you very much, Carol.
Thank you, Chief. Dr. Marshall, I want to pose this question to you. Educational change cannot be viewed as a top-down imposition, but requires significant buy-in from our constituents. Our most valuable constituents in the regard of the profession would be our teachers. In order for that change to be operationalized across the system, what roles should teacher training and ongoing professional development play in a reconfigured educational system?
All right, thank you. I will just get writing your questions so I get all of it. Let me deal first of all with professional development. I believe that, and the research is clear, that if we are going to raise the profile of our teachers, we definitely need to have ongoing professional development. So that is a must. But I don't only want to talk about professional development for teachers. I want to suggest that we must also have ongoing professional development for our principals as well. And I'm saying that because earlier you asked the question, how do we change mindsets? And the way to change a mindset is to basically to build it into your KPIs, your key performance indicators. So if I'm holding you accountable as a teacher to have ongoing professional development, what that will do is that will cause me as a teacher to seek out opportunities to develop myself professionally, because now it becomes an element of my evaluation. By the same token, if the principals are being evaluated as well, and part of their remit is to develop and succession plans and to develop other leaders, then because that is part of their KPIs or key performance indicators, they will be forced then to do it. And I'm not saying forced in a negative way, but I'm saying the only way you can get change in terms of professional development is if you make people accountable to see that it is done. And the way to see that it is done is to build it in to the evaluation system that says we are going to be evaluating you at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, in terms of what you have done in the area of professional development. Right now, as we speak, there is no, in fact, the evaluation system that we have does not even work well at all. It is almost a farcical, not almost, it is a farcical exercise, because there is no connection between you getting evaluated, let us say, for example, you getting a promotion in terms of the system as it works. So we have this farcical situation where we have teacher evaluation, but what does it do? Does it result, for example, in a teacher improving over time? Because we have this notion that, okay, if you are a seasoned teacher, we'll evaluate you every 3 years. If you're temporary, we'll evaluate you every semester. But the point I am making is that, as you said, is that if you are going to improve the teaching service generally, you must build in systems of effective evaluation, not the farcical thing that we have right now. We need to abandon that and get a real evaluation system that is tied to performance indicators. And then once we have those performance indicators, not only for teachers, as they say, but for principals, then what will happen is that the layer of accountability that we need so badly will now be built into the system. That is what we said from the get-go. If we are not serious about reform, then don't start cherry picking things. Let us do the systemic reform that we need to do so it can result or augur well for a change going forward. So in terms of professional development, I'm all for that. Let it be tied to performance indicators, and let it have sanctions or rewards tied to it as well. Otherwise, all you will do is exchange one evaluation system for another. And again, it might start out in terms of the novelty effect, it may start out good, but over time, it will also gain in significance because it is not tied to any meaningful thing. So therefore, do the professional development, but tie it to a sanction, tie it to a reward so that you get improvement across the sector. And importantly, you get to building accountability. Our fundamental problem in this country is that people are not held accountable for what they do or not do. And unless we change that culture, we'll be, as I said before, we'll be having schooling without learning. That is my contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Chief, do you want to speak to the whole issue of teacher training and what our focus or our priority should be in that area as we move forward? In a very general way.
Okay, yes, Denise. Teacher training and continuous professional development under that umbrella of teacher training is extremely important. I agree with Dr. Marshall on that. It is extremely important if we want to see improvements within our education system. Now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, the focus of the continuous professional development was technology and the use of technology within the classroom. We've trained a number of teachers. When I say we, under Erdiston has trained a number of teachers in that area. Today, there are about 100 teachers who are accessing a workshop with Tampere University in Finland to learn how to use the digital technologies in the classroom. So that is something that we have given priority to with regard to the technology. But I believe that we should have continuous professional development across all areas. I understand also, and at all levels, I understand what Dr. Marshall is saying with regard to ensuring that there are workshops for principals as well. I must tell you, Dr. Marshall, that during this summer that just passed, we had a number of principals that accessed workshops in areas like budgeting. They looked at change management. They looked at stress and how to de-stress in this COVID-19 environment. There were a number of areas that were touched that principals had an opportunity to, meet with one another and develop communities so that they can handle this pandemic, in the best way. What we want to see, of course, is that continue. We want to see not only the one-off workshops, but the continuous workshops being offered to lend our teachers support and to lend our principals support. So yes, I agree that teacher training is important and that we have to look at evaluation as well. What I can say to you too, Dr. Marshall, is that we have begun to look at that teaching standards. And as I said, I've been meeting with the ministry, has been meeting with unions and meeting with the NCPTA and so on, teachers as well, principals, to look at teaching standards and what kind of teaching standards we should have across the system. We're using the CARICOM proposed teaching standards. We're looking at those and evaluating those. So, you're not seeing the changes yet, but change is afoot. We are actively doing these things so that when the time comes, we're able to say, yes, well, this is what we have. Also, going back to what Dr. Marshall's point again, he started out by stating that we have to look at a number of structures, but it makes no sense dismantling structures if we don't have a vision. We need to have a very, very clear vision. We need to understand what the ideal Barbadian citizen should be. Because at the end of the day, it is student-centric. At the end of the day, we have to look at what kind of student we want. And then the supporting structures are built. Structure and then function, structure and function, but you cannot look at structure in a vacuum, right? So yes, we are analyzing the various structures. The Education Reform Unit, they're working extremely hard to, and as you know, when it comes to reform, as has been alluded to in this discussion, There are a number of things to look at. You can't look at all at the same time. So we've identified some as a matter of priority, and we are working actively to bring some kind of, to bring about the change that is necessary to move our education system forward. Change can't happen in 2 weeks, but we have to at least start, and we have started the process. You have that assurance. We have started the process.
Thank you so much, Chief. As we begin to wind down, we have a number of questions from YouTube that I'm sorry we're not going to be able to answer at this point. There was one on learning disabilities and the need to diagnose students and so on. I thought that was such an important question because we really didn't get to discuss the area of special needs this evening, but we know for sure that inclusivity and moving towards more inclusive educational practices is a hallmark of any new reformed educational system. But as we wind down, because we're moving towards 7:45, as we wind down our discussion this evening, I'm going to pose my final question to the entire panel, and I'm going to ask them to just share their views in a very succinct way. According to the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, the 21st century citizen is one possessing the core competencies of critical thinking and problem solving, communication, collaboration, and creativity and innovation. And I think we've all alluded to these tonight in our discussion. As we extend this idea to the ideal Barbadian or Caribbean citizen, we see the added values of respect for humanity, inclusivity, a good work ethic, empathy, with a strong sense of national identity and of cultural heritage. This we alluded to as well. Now, this is a very tall order for any educational system. Now, are we satisfied that we are heading in the right direction in terms of these educational deliverables for the 21st century? And what is the next priority move we think, individually, I'm asking you that, you think is needed for this to be realized? This will be your final question. I don't know who wants to go first.
You want me to take it, Denise? I'll take it.
You can.
Yes. It starts with the vision. And when I opened my opening remarks, I spoke about those things, you know, habits of mind. Yes, and through this discussion, we recognize that we need to have in the forefront of our minds what kind of citizen we want to see in the next couple of years, the next 2 to 14 years. Right? It starts with a vision. The next step is to change the hardwired mindsets that many of us have when it comes to education. We can implement all of the policy that we want. Unless we have the people who have to implement the policy and those who provide the support thinking about education in a new way, that policy will not be implemented, nor will it be implemented, or if it is implemented, it would not be implemented properly. So it is to bring about the paradigm shifts at every level, at the level of the teacher, at the level of the principal, at the level of the ministry, the parents, the public, everybody, right? The thing is, as I always say, the ministry can't do it alone. We need all hands on deck. We need everybody to realize that they have a stake in this education, and that when we educate the students today, we are educating our future. We are educating our future. We need to look at it seriously. And I know there are some of us who want to see the change taking place now, but it's not something that will happen instantaneously. It will take time. But know that if we work together, we will make some measurable steps to bring about the change that is so much needed within our education system.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to invite each panel. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, can I come in here? I heard Carl Roberts mention the ideal Barbadian. In 2010, we introduced the Caribbean Ideal Person concept at Queen's College, the document emerging out of the heads of governments. You can go and Google it, Caribbean Ideal Person, you see the principles of which the heads of governments think should be developing the ideal Caribbean person, to function in society, both in the Caribbean and abroad. We introduce it in our values-based education in the form of assembly. We talk about it, self-esteem, positive work ethic. So we have been trying. In 2009, our Teachers Professional Day look at critical thinking and problem solving, the concept of it, and the theory of it, and then we invited our teachers to construct their lessons, and always thinking about when they construct their lessons, how they can include problem solving and critical thinking in the delivery education. I want to say, as a principal, practically, as a practical man in the field and on the ground, this is how I feel about it. We have been struggling with these things. I hope our colleagues and all in the system are aware of it, and that we can produce students out of the school as productive citizens. Now, I want to say as well to this panel and to all of Barbados, we talk, but we get frightened about certain things. Remember the rise in the crime and violence all over the place? We start to hear that one of the reasons why these fellows are violent, the educational system failed them. The combinations failed them. They're being recruited for the drug lords. And I remember that I said to myself, I am going to look at other aspects of teaching and emphasize it more and learning. And not only emphasizing and talking all day about academic achievement and academic assessment, but to incorporate certain principles of the Caribbean ideal person into our values base to our children, and to produce out of our school that productive citizen who would contribute to the development of our society and our economy and keep it going and forever going. And that I heard some person recently say that those students who leave our schools, who we refuse to let into the front door of our schools, they come into the back door of our homes. And that we were under pressure to look again at who we produce, socialized children. What is all this crime and all this violence in school? What is the connection between what we are doing in school and what is happening? These people terrorizing us in our communities. The schools step up to it. Values-based teaching and values-based education has always been a part of what we do in the school, but I became more conscious of it, and I hope my colleagues become more conscious of it.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'm going to ask the others to weigh in. What is your critical next step? Mr. Eastmond?
I think that you talk about a vision for education, but there cannot be a proper vision for education unless that is informed by a vision for the country. Education does not happen in a vacuum. The country has to know where it is going. The country has to know where its priorities are. What sectors are we going to develop? We don't have all this money to spread around. We have to prioritize. And I don't think we have only tourism that was functioning and now tourism is struggling. We have to decide which 2 or 3 sectors we are going to and build out, and that will inform our training needs. Then we have a vision for education that we can work on. And I said that when we talk about education, we seem just to think schools. We have a whole workforce, and some of it may be young, that we have to retool to suit those priority needs that we have. And I think Mr. Hill was alluding to it. We have to create a demand-driven education and training system, and not just a supply-driven education system as we have now. And I think that some of the things we mentioned, like a core curriculum, which we emphasize certain things like the technology, and integrating the technology and education lower down, and taking some policy decisions as what we are going to teach, how long we're going to keep our children, how we're going to prioritize what our tertiary institutions do, because we are a small country with slender resources, to make our education system more demand-driven and more efficient. I think that is what we have to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Eastmond. Who's next?
Okay, good night, everyone.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, one of the key things I would just say is that at Sport Barbados, our strategy, as we articulate for the next 10 years, is an emphasis on the life sciences. That is where the industry is going. That is where the investors are going for a number of reasons, because it's our core strength, because that is also where the whole global economy is going as well. So I'm just hoping that there will be openness. I know Dr. Brown said it's open, that the strategy, we're prepared to share it and continue to share it with the team. We're getting ready to do a full national audit on our life sciences by a leading accounting firm. And we'll make that information available to the educational powers that be, so that you can see where we're going from an industry perspective, but more so from an export perspective. I just want to reiterate to our listeners that this economy runs on US dollars. Every book, every meal that is served by the school meal service, somebody has to go and earn that foreign exchange in order to feed the children, in order to maintain teachers' salaries. Those are paid through US dollars. So therefore, education has to facilitate the understanding of how does the country earn its foreign exchange to keep us going as a country. Otherwise, we will continue to live off of borrowed money, and the government will be forced to keep borrowing money if we don't learn to educate our people to do proper exports. So that's it for me for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And Carol, your closing comment in terms of next step? Mm-hmm.
Our next step to take us forward has to be what many will view as actually a step backward. We can't go forward unless we know who we are, on whose shoulders we stand, and accept that for every single area of current endeavor, there is a past, a historical, a cultural, a heritage-based item, strategy, practice, convention that can stand the test of time. So the sciences, the innovation, the technology, the mechanics, all of that will do us no good if our children, their parents, and our teachers. So in other words, if we as Barbadians do not have that sense of national consciousness, if we cannot say what is the best of the Barbadian personality, our children will continue to learn by rote. They will continue to look to other sources for inspiration. They will continue to hold other structures and personalities and practices and inventions as superior to ours, because we are not grounded and immersed in what makes us truly Barbadian. And it is not difficult to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Very well said. I think everyone has spoken. Their last comment?
No, I have not.
Dr. Marshall, yes, sorry. You go ahead.
Thank you. I wouldn't want you to leave you at this juncture. You asked the question, are we moving in the right direction? And I will say to that a resounding no. And I say that for this reason, because we are still doing things the old way. And let me explain what I mean. I believe that, again, this whole issue of we're looking at reform now. And I want to say that if you're talking about reform, I want to see that we get to a place in Barbados where we say, you know what, we're going to spend, let us say, an entire year if we need that time, talking with the people on the ground, these teachers in the school system, and get to hear from them what it is that they want the education system to look like going forward. We need to flip the script, as I say, and hear from those who are in the trenches. We still have this idea that the best way to approach reform is to have a top-down method, and then say, oh, we have consulted because we have 1 or 2 town hall meetings. That is not where we are at. If we have teachers on the ground who are there working every day, hear from them and let them drive the reform process, because you could come with all the reforms in the world you want to. And if those people at the ground don't have the buy-in, all that will happen is that will be another reform that has gone by the wayside, or an attempt, at reform that will be on the rocks, so to speak. So I want to suggest the way forward is to take, as I said from the inception, a critical look at where we are. And Carol alluded to that. There are 4 dimensions of quality. You have inputs, outputs, processes, and outcomes. And you can choose any one of them and decide, okay, for the next 10 years, or whatever time frame you want to attach to it, we're going to focus on the inputs. And then we move forward systematically to break down the structural inequalities that exist in our system. And unless we do that, we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes that previous administrations have had in their attempt to reform. And that is what I will say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. At the end of the day, I do appreciate all the comments, all the closing comments, and we also must recognize that our movement towards education reimagination cannot happen in one fell swoop. It is not going to be an instantaneous event. It is not an event. It is actually a process. And I think based on all that we've shared this evening, we recognize the critical components that are required. And one of those critical components is continued discourse, continued discussion, a reformation of our thinking, a reformation of our acting. And I think we all agree that when our philosophy changes, when our belief system changes, when our mindsets change, then we are greater empowered. We are better empowered to bring about the necessary policy changes. And with respect to a lot that Mr. Marshall would have mentioned, the ministry is moving towards having those more meaningful discussions with all of our constituents, and certainly our teachers are very important as we move towards education reform. Our discussion this evening has been on the reimagination of education. What should education that is reimagined look like in Barbados? What should it feel like? And I think we can all agree this evening that it is critical, it is necessary as we move further into the 21st century, as we want to have our country better poised to meet the demands of an ever-changing global digital environment. We need to see that change happen. And we can agree this evening that we need to work in synergy. We need to come out of our silos in terms of across departments, across ministries, even across statutory bodies, so that we can ensure that what we deliver to our students, our educational product, is the best that it can be for Barbados's national development. And even as our theme suggested, the reimagination of education will begin. It has started with an exploration. So we are on that journey towards exploring all that we need to do to shift both in our mindsets, in terms of our actions, to see education move to that position where it needs to be in the 21st century. I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. First, let me thank our panelists, Dr. Ramona Archer-Bradshaw, Mr. Mark Hill, Mr. Henderson Eastmond, Dr. David Brown, Mrs. Carol Roberts-Reifer, and Dr. Ian Marshall. Thank you for your contributions, your valued contributions this evening. I want to thank all of the staff and officials at the Ministry of Education who made this occasion possible. I want to especially thank the Education Month Committee, who worked very hard as well to make this event possible. I want to thank MRD for their technical support, and I want to thank you, our viewers on YouTube, those who are viewing now live and those who will come to view later. Thank you so much for being a part of our panel this evening. I think I did mention Mr. Henderson Eastmond. If I didn't, I want to thank you as well, Mr. Eastmond, for being a part of our panel this evening. So thank all of you very much for being here with us and sharing with us this evening. God bless you, stay safe, and good evening.